Devastation caused by Cyclone Pam. Information is still coming, but it appears that Cyclone Pam has caused extensive damage and also sadly loss of life. The government has now pledged $2.5 million to help with immediate relief. The two Defence Force relief flights departed from Vanuatu today are carrying vital relief supplies. This follows on from a Royal New Zealand Air Force C-130 aircraft that left yesterday carrying 8 tonnes of relief supplies and personnel to Vanuatu. On Saturday, with communications largely down, we immediately sent a P3 Orion to conduct damage assessment flights over Tuvalu, the First Nation and Cyclone Pam's path. Clearly it remains a very difficult situation in the affected countries, and we will continue to do all we can to help our Pacific neighbours. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade consular officers are contacting New Zealanders in Vanuatu to confirm their well-being. At this stage, the Ministry has not received reports of any New Zealand casualties. We will be making space on the departing C-130s for New Zealanders who have an urgent need to return before commercial flights are back and up and running. Priority will be given to those with medical conditions, the elderly and families with very young children. At this stage, New Zealand's effort and energy is focused on providing emergency relief. When we can better assess the situation, we will look at the long-term needs of the people of Vanuatu. I have no doubt that New Zealand, alongside other international partners, will ensure appropriate ongoing support is made available. And I made this point to the Prime Minister last night when I spoke to him. People will make their own judgment and should continue to check the Safe Travel website, but MFAT advises against all tourist and other non-essential travel to Vanuatu. Here in New Zealand, the East Coast has been the most affected by the cyclone, with heavy seas and storm surges along the coastline. In preparation for this, civil defence and some military defence personnel were dispatched to the area in advance. A number of people have been evacuated from areas close to the sea, and roads have been closed due to slips. The cyclone is moving away from the North Island, but civil defence is advising people still need to take care until the weather improves. It's especially important to stay away from East Coast beaches where there are currently very large waves. The cyclone is now heading towards the Chatham Islands, so people there should make sure that they are prepared. Once again, I'm advised that 3 civil defence personnel were dispatched to the Chathams to provide assistance this morning. In regards to the threat to contaminate infant and other milk formula products with 1080, the police investigation is ongoing. Around 70 people have contacted police with information to help inform this investigation, and police are following up on each one of those calls. MPI is continuing to work with New Zealand manufacturers and retailers in relation to further strengthen the supply chain security and to encourage consumer vigilance in checking for tampering of any product. Over 52,000 tests for 1080, all negative, have been completed to date. MFAT officials remain in ongoing contact with our trading partners, and so far reaction to the threat has been measured. I would once again like to reassure parents that every precaution has been taken to ensure our infant and other formulas are safe. This includes extra testing and increased security measures as further safeguards. You will have seen the announcement from Transport Minister Simon Bridges regarding a future second Waitemata Harbour crossing. This future proofing allows for the expected rapid population growth in Auckland over the next 20 years. The government is focused on ensuring good transport links in Auckland and around New Zealand because of the benefit to business and the economy, as well as making it easier for Kiwis to get from A to B. According to advice, this additional crossing to the east of Auckland Harbour is likely to cost between $4 and $6 billion and will be needed between 2025 and 2030. Today I can announce that I'll be welcoming the Vietnam Prime Minister Zung at Government House in Auckland this Thursday. This is the first official visit by Prime Minister Zung to New Zealand, and he is bringing with him a delegation of more than 100 senior ministers and business leaders. This year marks 40 years of diplomatic relations between our two countries, and that relationship continues to strengthen. This visit will allow us to celebrate that as well as discuss ways that we can work more closely together in areas including education, agriculture and UN peacekeeping cooperation. Just in terms of my upcoming international travel, I'll be departing for Korea and Japan on Sunday. In Korea, I will join President Park and other trade ministers for the signing of the New Zealand-Korea Free Trade Agreement. This is a significant milestone in the relationship between New Zealand and Korea, and one that will bring benefits for both countries. Korea is New Zealand's 6th largest export destination, with a total two-way trade in goods of $4 billion last year. I'll continue on from Korea to Japan to meet Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to discuss trade and foreign affairs. I will be accompanied by Trade Minister Tim Grosser for the trip to both Korea and Japan. Melissa Lee will also accompany us to Korea. Just in terms of the House this week, we intend to continue with the committee stage of the Construction Contracts Amendment Bill and progress the Harmful Digital Communications Bill. Wednesday is a Members' Day. And finally, in terms of my own activities this week, I'll be here in Wellington today, tomorrow and Wednesday. On Thursday, I'll travel to Auckland to meet the Vietnamese Prime Minister, as I mentioned. Then later in the day, I'll be heading to New Plymouth to meet with local iwi. I'm starting in New Plymouth overnight and will be in Taranaki with Tura Level on Friday. Finally, on Sunday, I'll take off for Korea and Japan. And finally, I probably should advise in terms of the House, it's the advice I have from the ministers. My expectation is that the MP's remuneration bill will be introduced to the House this week.
Prime Minister, is it time for a full-scale independent review of all MPs' perks and all MPs' pay?
Look, I don't think so. There are a number of benefits that MPs have either enjoyed or are just a function of what they do. They're pretty well established. Largely, if you can see that the authority has been moving benefits away from non-cash to cash items. That's the trend that we also see in the private sector. In terms of, if you're asking the question in relation, for instance, to former MPs' perks, I think it's really worth remembering that essentially we've come in New Zealand, and not just in terms of MPs' salaries, but actually in the private sector as well, away from a situation where people used to receive less cash and more benefits. I myself remember starting in my first job and getting a suit allowance and a booze allowance and various other things. Nowadays people pretty much get cash. So we of course could just take those benefits off former and old MPs, but we'd be doing that retrospectively. They would argue very strongly, and do, that we'd be taking away some of their entitled income because they were paid less as a result of it, and I think it's just bad practice generally to go back retrospectively.
But I suppose, given the fact that MPs and you're talking a lot about the private sector, the relationship that MPs' pay should have with that. I mean, very few private sector people enjoy benefits beyond their time in a job. I mean, isn't it about time to just get rid of this altogether?
Well, as I say, you really would have to go back and say to those former MPs, and these are MPs that left, I think, prior to 1999, or in the House prior to 1999. I mean, really you've got to say to those people, well, even though we paid you a lower salary with all of these entitlements which you're aware of, we're now not going to pay you the salary then, and we're not going to give you the entitlements. Now, in reality, there's a finite limit to how long those benefits will be paid, and on that basis, we could take it off them, but generally, retrospective legislation is not a good thing.
In terms of the way the government's gone about it with the MP remuneration bill and also the change to the travel arrangements, both were mechanisms where public input wouldn't have been able to happen. Is that the right course of action? Should the public be able to have a say on these changes?
I'm not sure that's strictly right. I might be wrong, but I think in terms of the particular one you're talking about in relation to former MPs, that was in relation to the Statutes Amendment Bill. And I thought my understanding of that was that that did go to a select committee in 2013, so I think the public would have been able to input there.
It was only made public last week and would have been considered at the committee stage debate tomorrow night had it proceeded. So the public... Well,
I mean, anyone's free to sit into the select committee, and it wouldn't be in private session, I would have thought. I mean, the history of all the stuff, as I understand it, was that the select committee actually added the words lowest cost in error. The point was raised to the government by Parliamentary Services and by the Labour Party. The government could understand the argument was there, it looked to correct the technical error. My understanding was that the Labour Party agreed to consult with its partners on its side of the House, which included the Greens. We consulted with those on our side, and now the Greens have withdrawn their support, fair enough, but it wasn't our responsibility to consult them. We were doing we were following a course of action that we believed had unanimous support, and we'll revise that.
The question is, these subsequent changes that the government have been considered have been of such a nature that the public would have got no input into them whatsoever. Why have you chosen that course of action?
Well, in the case of MP's remuneration, they're going to get paid next week, and I think in the end we have actually listened to the public. I think the public's general view is they want to see more modest pay rises for MPs, and we're delivering that.
Why should former MPs get to fly business class on the taxpayer?
Well, I'm not the one to negotiate their package of benefits and entitlements that happened when they were a member of Parliament. That was, well and truly predates my time. And I only came into Parliament in 2002. And these entitlements stopped effectively for anyone after 1999. All I can tell you is that was what was agreed back then. And their argument is that it was part of their overall package that took less cash for more benefits. That was consistent with what happened in the private sector. So, yep, as I said, you could go and withdraw that from them. At the end of the day, though, yeah, it's retrospective, and it's a little bit like retrospectively changing tax law. It's generally seen as not good faith. It's a relatively small amount, and there's only a finite number of people in that category, and eventually those entitlements will cease.
So, Prime Minister,
feasible though for them to fly business parties?
Well, I think I'm not the expert. I think you really need to go and ask Parliamentary Services, but my understanding is that's the formulation for the financial allowance they get. I don't think they have to fly business class. I think they can use it for more trips. So I could be wrong on that.
So this change that Minister Bridges tried to put into the Statutes Amendment Bill, this was something that was initiated by Labor.
Yeah, well, my understanding, the advice I've had was the original reference point was always these Air New Zealand business class fares. Then, for whatever reason, when it went to the Select Committee added the words lowest cost. The trouble was that they went away and said, well, lowest cost actually, this is what I guess these 1999 or pre-1999 members said, that's actually not fair because we can't actually book that fare because, like a lot of things on the internet, you can't always necessarily get it. And so it was brought to our attention by Parliamentary Services and by Annette King. And that was why we made the change. And Annette King and the Labor Party agreed they would consult with all of their members, we consulted with all of ours, and so they spoke to the Greens. So I'm advice.
On the X Factor, because this is the story of the day,
Yeah.
Is there any truth in the rumour that you're going to put yourself forward as one of the judges?
No. Plenty of people judge me, it's the other way around. I don't judge other people.
What do you think of this? Does this say something about bullying in our culture and how we should be attacking it?
I honestly haven't followed it. I'm sorry.
You don't watch the X Factor at all?
I don't have time. I'm too busy doing other things.
It is a show that has attracted $2.4 million from New Zealand on air over 2 seasons.
Yeah.
Is this really what New Zealanders want to be seeing on their screen?
Well, I guess people, kind of vote with their eyeballs, don't they? So, they'll only get to fund things, and the TV channels will only basically play things that get popular support for the most part. And all of these sort of shows, X Factor and others, do attract a lot of support. People like them and they watch them. They're very expensive to make, is my understanding. They always, if you look at the nature of them, have always had that element of being, pretty robust. And I think that's part of what attracts people watching them. And Simon Cowell hasn't made his fortune out of anything other than, being pretty robust, shall we say, with people that watch the show or people that are on the show.
Can you expand on Simon Bridges' announcement about the Waipuna crossing today? What is it? Is it exactly that he's announced? Because a quick Google suggests that you announced pretty much this back in 2013, the 6-lane crossing with a railway attached. So what
That was our
news
preference.
today?
I think they're future proofing, so I think it's literally around the designation of actually where it will go and buying some of the land to future proof that.
Prime Minister, just on 1080, is there any concern around potential threats to NPI itself?
I haven't seen any, no.
On Iraq, can you give any advice, when you've talked before about the previous Iraqi government and the role it's played by shutting the
Yes.
Sunnis out of, but if you had any advice on going back to the American-led invasion in 2003 and decisions then to remove Sunnis from the army and other positions of influence as to how much impact that's had?
I wouldn't say I'd have written advice, but every Tuesday I have my national security meeting, and as part of that national security meeting in recent times, we've had real specialists in this particular area, in the Middle East, and particularly what's happening in Iraq. So there's a course of sort of wider questioning and conversations, a variety of different issues are raised, and then there are a variety of different reports that are given to me by the National Assessment Bureau and others, some of which are obviously highly classified. And I can't tell you of any specific advice about either the things that America might have got right or wrong in terms of that, but just generally there's been a lot of advice and discussion on the wider issue of Iraq and military involvement.
But given, the commentary by a number of, academics and others about that, have you been given a reassurance from that analysis that proposal now in terms of help and train, because obviously a lot of it's American-led,
Yes.
that there aren't going to be the repeat of the sorts of perhaps mistakes that were made earlier.
Yes, I mean that broader issue. I mean the broader question of if the Americans spent so much money and so much time and didn't deliver a strong Iraqi forces argument, is if you accept that argument, then there's a valid question that says why would now be any different? And I've raised that point with my officials on numerous occasions, including the defence personnel and MFAT personnel. And the reassurance I've been given is that there are a variety of different circumstances now, but they start with the head of the government, the corruption that they believe was in place before and how they believe that's different now, the more inclusive approach that's been taken. So there's a variety of different factors of why they believe it was unsuccessful in the past and more likely to be successful now.
Just on the 1080 threat, have you received any advice about any copycat threats since the Republic last Tuesday?
No one's come to me and said, look, they've picked up or detected that that's the case. Obviously that is a risk, and the risk that people are worried about. I will say this though, that obviously 1080 is very tightly controlled, so the capacity for copycats is significantly lower, but nevertheless that's always the risk that people worry about.
Have there been any other threats that you haven't disclosed?
No.
Just on Vanuatu, how long do you think New Zealand will need to be involved in the clean-up?
I don't have any strong advice on that. When I spoke to the Vanuatu Prime Minister last night, I mean, he sort of had very limited information. He said in the outer islands they had no communication, they weren't sure. While they were restoring water and electricity, so a lot of it was off. And as we know in Port Bella, a huge number of the homes have been destroyed. So it's going to be a long, slow process, I think. If you take sort of some guidance, I guess, out of what happens, for instance, Samoa after the tsunami there, it was a good year or two that it took to really work through, a lot of the bigger issues. Now, a couple of years on, the situation was restored largely back to how it had been with stronger infrastructure, but it's not something that can happen overnight. So we're very much in the emergency phase at the moment. That'll carry on for weeks, maybe even months, and then beyond that will be a more permanent solution of rebuilding.
How much more aid do you think you may have to provide?
I think in Samoa, you're slightly testing my memory, but I've got a feeling we put in around about 17 million in the end. So I think over a course of time, along with a number of other agencies and international governments, have got quite a bit more money. I spoke to British Prime Minister David Cameron on Sunday morning. He pledged £2 million at that point, but indicated they'd likely make further contributions.
Are you likely to put the reversal to the travel perk thing through by means of a separate bill as an amendment rather than in the statutes amendment?
Well, that's a complicated question.
Sorry.
Isn't it just going to lapse? I think the story is that we don't, I suppose you're saying you could put it through without having an
Will you
SOP.
put it through as a separate bill?
Yeah, I doubt it, no.
So that means you'll keep it as it is now,
Yeah.
that it's based on the lower cost fare?
Yep, and the former MPs who are represented by Graham Kelly and others will have to take that up with the Greens.
Back to the issue of Tuvalu and Vanuatu. Have you
Yes.
had any reports from Tuvalu or the damage there? Was there any assistance being?
Yeah, well, the P3 Orion did those, I think I said in my remarks, did the fly, but I mean, I think we've given some small amounts of support there, and we're likely to assess that over time and have a good look. I mean, my understanding is there's another cyclone brewing, maybe potentially another quite significant one that we're likely to see maybe by Friday, so we'll have to keep an assessment of that as well.
And also, a lot of the damage has been blamed not just on the strength of the winds, but on the poor construction of some of the houses there. Does New Zealand have any role in ensuring that any replacement accommodation there is actually fit for purpose, given how prone it is to cyclones?
Well, I think that's part of the assistance we can play in making sure that some of the infrastructure is stronger. You can't rebuild, and I don't think New Zealanders would expect us to rebuild every home in Vanuatu. I think what they would expect us to do is play a role in strengthening the core infrastructure, maybe some sort of buildings that can be used as shelters in the past. But winds must have been very strong, because I think it was the Minister of Foreign Affairs said to me some of the properties that have been constructed with cyclone-proof roofs had their roofs lifted. So they're quite cyclone-proof.
Was there damage to the High Commission building?
Not sure. You have to ask what the Minister of Foreign Affairs didn't say which roofs, but he said some of the ones we built apparently had the roofs ripped off.
Over the weekend, America criticised Britain for joining the Asian Infrastructure Investment
Yeah.
Bank, which New Zealand has agreed to join. Have we ever been pressured or challenged by America about joining up to this Chinese?
No, the Americans haven't raised the issue with me.
On Northland, are you satisfied with the progress economically that region's made under the National Lead government?
Yes, but of course you can always do more. And I think over the last 7 years that we've been in government, we've made significant investments in Northland, and a fair bit of progress has been made. But it's really obvious to see some areas where greater economic growth could occur. I mean, for instance, we have been pro the concept of some mining and exploration in Northland. We're actively trying to get the treaty settlement with Ngāpuhi completed in Northland. We've already completed quite a number of settlements up there, as you'll be aware. So there are always more things that can occur and we can do. I mean, certainly the economic growth in the last 12 months has been strong in Northland, but we need a lot more of that. I mean, at the core of all of it sits, I think, with poor education outcomes for a lot of young people in Northland. So there's I think some of the steps that we've taken there, which are very long term, like national standards, nevertheless will be effective over time.
Because since 2009, its growth has lagged behind every other region, apart from Taranaki. So, I mean, and do you put that down to those sorts of issues?
There's a variety of very long-term issues there, and they're not easy ones to resolve overnight. There's been some great investment there. I mean, Marsden Point was upgraded under our watch. You've seen some pretty good things happening in Northland, but I accept that more can be done, and we need to do more. And my very strong argument would be that if Northland has a representative who has a voice in government, then I think they're more likely to make progress. But that in the end is the matter for the people of Northland.
Are you going to roll out the Port Barrel again? Is there any more spending announcements to be made by the government?
Well, there are always more announcements that can be made, but look, at the end of the day, I mean, I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that we are investing a lot of money right around New Zealand. I mean, the announcement of the bridges, you can make your own assessment of that, but it's in the context of us spending a huge amount of money and going to spend a lot of money there. So
but when you announced the bridges last week, you were quite bullish about saying to us, expect more of the same. Don't be surprised if you hear some more. Are you downplaying that now? Is there any more?
Well, we announced we made an announcement about broadband. There might be other things coming
that
up.
was just the policy you already announced. Is there any more specific spending in Northland that you're going to announce?
Could be.
You didn't take issue when he suggested that you rolled out the Port Barrel, was it?
Oh, well, I've got broad shoulders.
Are you coming back from Korea and Japan earlier than you anticipated because of the by-election?
Yes, I'm coming back on the Thursday, and I'll be in Northland on the Friday.
How close do you think it'll be in the end?
It's going to be pretty close. I think that's the reality. I mean, what you've got is a situation where by-elections are often really close. They're close for a number of reasons. Firstly, one, you quite often get a situation where it becomes a two-horse race. We have that. So the other political parties have all capitulated pretty much around Winston Peters, so that makes life a bit more difficult. Turnout could be very low. I mean, it's hard to tell, but could be very low. So you've got a number of different factors there. But in the end, we'll have to, give our best. And if we can get turnout out, if we can get our voters to turn out, then we'll hold the seat. If we can't, it'll be an interesting outcome.
Would you expect a recount from either side if it's close?
Wow, the history of Winston Peters, isn't it? Challenges and petitions on spending and stuff. So let's wait and see.
But surely for you guys, if you lost by 50 votes or so, you might challenge.
Oh, let's not think negatively, Katie.
What about a legal challenge? David Seymour hinted that he could challenge if Winston won.
Yeah, I asked him about that the other night. He said there's some QC in Auckland that's running around with the view that it's illegal, but I for life me can't see why.
If you're coming back early for the Northern by-election, what were you planning on doing instead? Were you going to stay in Japan earlier, longer?
I think so. I mean, they've slightly altered my program, but look, in the end, it's I mean, you can obviously see it both ways. On the one hand, obviously, I can always change my schedule a little bit, and I do. If I didn't come back, people would say I didn't care about the people of Northland. And if I do come back, people will say I'm worrying too much about Northland. So it is what it is. In the end, it's an important by-election for us. We'd like to hold the seat if we can. We've got a good candidate, and we're putting in a good effort. But it's going to be a tough fight there.
How much time are your MPs and ministers spending on this campaign?
Reasonable amount. I mean, it's a seat we want to hold, and you do have every other political party, with the obvious exception of ACT, working behind Winston Peters. So that makes life a lot more difficult for us. And if we don't get out the vote, it's going to be very tight. I mean, you can look at it whatever way you like, but if you go back to the 94 Selwyn by-election, You know, it's a seat we hold by 22,000 today. We only just won it against the Alliance candidate when David Carter came in. You look at the 97 by-election for Taranaki King Country, you know, Jim Bolger had just gone off to Washington. We only just won it by about 1,400 votes, I think, against an ACT candidate then. You look at 92 when Muldoon went, very, very safe national seat with Tamaki, that's probably the safest we've got in urban Auckland. We only just won it against, again, an Alliance candidate with Clem Sillage. So even in our safer seats, by-elections are very fickle, difficult matters. There's no getting away from that. And so there are challenges there, we accept that, but we do believe we've got a good story.
You said with the exception of ACT that they were all ganging up on you, but surely United Future and the Maori Party aren't actively campaigning for Winston Peters, are they?
I don't think they're campaigning at all much. I mean, the Maori Party might be, but I don't think United Future is.
So do you think they're throwing their weight behind the Winston Peters win?
All the others on the other side of the house.
Both Winston Peters and Andrew Little are campaigning on sending the government a message. Do you reckon you've got the message?
Well, I think it's very easy to come up with rhetoric, and as I said to you, it's easy to sort of make promises and say you'll do things. So at the end of the day, Winston Peters hasn't cared about Northland for 40 years. I mean, it's been a pretty long career and a lot of opportunities to get up there and represent the people of Northland. He's never chosen to do it. He didn't run a candidate, not even his weakest candidate, in any of the last 3 elections. He's not going to live anywhere near his electorate. He's going to be 4 hours drive away. And if they select Winston Peters, a new MP is going to come in on the New Zealand First list that lives in Invercargill. So really, is that going to deliver, you know, strong representation for Northland? I don't personally think so. But in the end, it's for the people of Northland, and you know they will decide who the next representative is going to be.
You say his house in Auckland is 4 hours drive away from the edge of the electorate?
Oh, the very edge is Wellsford, but the bulk of the population is actually up in Kerikeri, and it's 4 hours.
He does have a house there, though, in Whananaki.
Listen.
You've got lots of MPs not only on the phone talking to people up there, but also spending their time up there during parliamentary sitting time. Is that an appropriate use of MPs' time, given that that's campaigning for a national candidate when they're paid by the taxpayer to be in Wellington?
No, the rules are really clear about an MP or a minister about when they can either use transportation, ground transportation, or flights. And also, you know, when our people go, I mean, I go to electorates all the time, our people go to electorates all the time. Yes, there's, you know, probably a few more trips happening in Northland at the moment, but that's just the nature of the fact that, you know, we've got a good story to tell, and we want to tell that story up there, and there's lots of things that we do there, but it's quite legitimate. I mean, Winston Peters wasn't even in Parliament last week.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, just as general, do you think it's okay for MPs who are supposed to be here during Parliament sitting time, aside from the use of resources, the use of their time, they are up in Northland rather than being in Parliament?
Well, what the government needs to focus on is ensuring it's got the numbers to maintain its majority, and the whips do that very effectively. Outside that, MPs travel and move all the time. You can make that case for everything, whether they should go overseas for a conference, whether they should go to a particular event that's on, whether they should go to their electorate. Yep, there's Northland by-election on, and there's plenty of them up there. Just as I say, like Winston Peters wasn't in Parliament to question me last week, and probably won't be this week.
Have you had any discussions with members of the Sikh community about their ceremonial daggers and now not being allowed to put up World Cup matches?
Not specifically about the ICC event, because that only happened, I think, yesterday, but yes, last Sunday I went to the Gurdwara at Takanini, and that particular issue was raised because the Sikh community's been looking for an exemption to the civil aviation rules. So for the 5Ks of the Kupang that they carry, I mean, I actually have a great deal of sympathy for their argument. I mean, the 5Ks are a reflection of their faith. At the end of it, it's a matter for the ICC. It's their tournament, not ours, so we can't dictate that to them. And I understand why some people might make the argument they should be concerned, but my understanding of the Kupang is it's you know, for the most part very small. It's a blunt instrument, and actually, if you want to make the case that someone could cause harm with that, they're probably much more likely to be able to cause harm with anything else you could get at the grounds, including a wine bottle or something else.
So what will happen with the
ICC were overreacted by?
Well, it's their tournament, and they make those rules, and at the moment we don't even have the exemption for civil aviation on our flights, but some countries have legislated for that, like I think the UK and Australia might.
Would you look at it?
Yes, so we might look at it, yes. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the view.
So will you get the Transport Minister to pick up on that?
I'm not unsympathetic to looking at that issue, and other countries have legislated towards that, because I think in reality, as I said, you know, the Kupang's, you know, it's very small, it's blunt, and it's a symbol of their faith. Yes, of course, you could make the argument that someone could use it as I suppose as a form of a weapon, but it's blunt, and it would be no more effective than picking up a bottle of wine off the Corrie Hour on your Air New Zealand plane. In fact, probably arguably far less effective.
So when will that happen? When do you think that the CAA could start looking at that?
Well, there's a process that they would have to go through, but I said to the Sikh community that we're not unsympathetic to the issue and we should look at it.
On the issue of dairy conversions in Waikato, Federated Farmers Boss there reckons there should be a debate about no more conversions, a moratorium on conversions there. What's your view on dairy conversions?
Well, I think what should drive that debate is the capacity for maintaining and improving the environment. And so I can't tell you whether there's too many conversions taking place or not enough. I don't have enough information on that. But the driving force isn't whether there's a certain number of farms, it's the capacity for the environment to cope with that. And we've seen in certain circumstances like around the lakes in the Taupo Rotorua area, land has been retired because it's deemed to be the most effective way of controlling obviously runoff and nutrients into the lakes. That was a sensible solution there. So whether there's enough or 2 million Waikato, I just don't have advice on that.
Is that a risk there for a peak dairy, that we don't have the capacity to grow that dairy?
No, but I think it speaks volumes about why the sorts of environmental measures that Federated Farmers, Fonterra and others are taking are the right ones, including the government when we announced the retirement of waterways, land adjacent to waterways during the campaign.
And what capacity is Stephen Joyce in Northland?
We have to ask Mr Joyce, but he can be there in many capacities if he wants.
From your point of view?
Well, he's certainly a minister of the government.
So he's up there on ministerial business?
I didn't say that, I said you have to ask him, but I said he's free to be there in any capacity. The rules are really clear. A minister is free to use both air travel and ground travel anytime they want, and in the middle of an election campaign, I'd use my ministerial limousine. MPs are free to fly anytime they want because there are no restrictions, no parliamentary purposes required, but for accommodation and for ground travel in the electorate, an MP needs to have a parliamentary purpose, and my understanding is all of our MPs are either being billeted, not staying overnight, and using their own resources for ground travel.
Including your ministers?
No, ministers are free for to abide by the rules, and their rules are different.
Are they allowed accommodation?
Don't know, I need to check that. I think they are, but I need to check that fine point on accommodation.
I see Fonterra's purchased $750 million in Beanmate, the Chinese infant formula company.
Did they?
Does that highlight potentially some of the risks of being too dependent on China, particularly that dairy industry in light of the 1080 scared us with?
Well, I don't know if that's a further purchase because they'd already made an announcement about Beanmate some time ago. Look, I think it's a good thing in so much that what it's showing you is investment goes both ways, both investment from China into New Zealand and New Zealand into China. It's still a massive market and presents huge opportunities for us. But the government is working hard to make sure that we do diversify our risks. I was at the India New Zealand Business Summit last week, and that was one of the points I made on Friday morning, that India's also got very similar demographics to China, presents great opportunities for us, and we should continue to investigate that, as we do with trying to get a FTA with, for instance, with Europe or with other parts of the world, the Gulf states.
Just back on the Northern by-election and MPs, is campaigning for the National Party appropriate parliamentary business?
You have to go and check the exact rules, but my understanding is yes, you can campaign.
And same for ministerial business, campaigning for the National Party?
Well, people do a variety of different things. It's very different to quarantine up, but my understanding is there's no rules. Everything they're doing is quite within the rules, and it's consistent with exactly what we do in a general election. It happens to be a by-election, but when a general election comes around, we don't all sit around and say, that can't be part of our job. We're paid as MPs and as Prime Minister during an election, middle of an election campaign. I carry on dealing with a whole variety of issues, including running the country, but I also go out and campaign every day.
Except in a general election, Parliament isn't sitting, so MPs aren't expected to be here sitting in select committees or sitting here late at night passing bills, etc.
But there's a variety of reasons why people here are not. In the end, the government would have to make sure that it has the numbers to pass its legislation and its program withstanding the confidence motion. That's the responsibility of the whips. However else they use their time is good. I mean, if anything, you can make the case if that means more MPs are in Northland, and Northland's arguing that they want to have their voice more loudly heard in Wellington, well, that's one way of achieving it.